Yeshiva World!
Thank you very much. Senator, you find yourself in the umbrella organization for Jewish education in North America. So we would like to ask an educational question by Hatzko Bennett, a member of the board of Agudas of America.
Morning, Senator. Welcome to Brooklyn. We had the opportunity about 2 months ago to get together in Washington, D.C. with the Agudas Board of Trustees. It was a very robust and wonderful conversation, and we all appreciated that. We're standing and sitting here today in the National Society of Hebrew Day Schools, Torah Masorah, on the podium. Today, Torah Masorah, the membership consists of over 800 day schools and yeshivas, with a total student enrollment of close to 200,000 students. There were 300. Okay. Website doesn't say that. There is hardly an existing community of Orthodox Jews across this country that today does not have access to a Jewish day school education. On the domestic front, the education of our children is our most important fight for equity. It is a fight for families and parents who are struggling with the costs, the overwhelming burden of tuition education. A burden that they happily embrace, but nonetheless a burden. It is an issue that affects literally every single religious Jewish family across the country. Tax-paying families as well. Closer to home here in New York City, 20% of all students attending schools are in non-public schools. Of that, the Orthodox Jewish community has now become the majority of that 20%. That number here and across the country is growing exponentially. Senator Paul, my two-part question is as follows. The office of the president is constantly used by the president as a bully pulpit on issues of national importance. We can all agree that there is an education crisis in this country. First question, what is your position on school choice? And second question, the federal government has found ways to incentivize and to motivate states for education performance, race to the top. Do you feel that there is a role for the federal government to encourage and incentivize individual states that would create school choice opportunities that empower parents and students, like tax credits or vouchers?
I think it's a great question. I think that in our country, education is the great equalizer, but not all education is equal out there. I grew up and went to public schools, and they were pretty good public schools. I had calculus and anatomy and physiology, physics. I had pretty decent education. But there's a lot of public schools that are very much languishing, and there's a lot of communities that for either religious reasons or education reasons would like to opt out. So I'm a big supporter of school choice, I'm a big supporter of vouchers, and I'm a big supporter that it's your money. You should be able to take it wherever you want, religious, private, secular, or public, and not just As far as where it should be directed, I'd like to see it more local than federal. Central planning doesn't work. Central planning for drug manufacturer, for industry, for making cars. Governments don't do a very good job of doing it, particularly the more centralized the authority. So I'm a bigger believer in decentralizing education, even for the part that is directed by the government. I'd rather see city, local, state. So if you have a complaint, your kids are in city school, you can go to the person who lives down the block and complain to your school board about it. So I'd like to see less direction on curriculum coming from the national level and have it more done at the local level. But I'm a big supporter of vouchers, big supporter of school choice. I've visited probably 10 to 15 charter schools. Charter schools, many of them were within the public sphere, but also better than giving just no choice. And really, we don't want a population where you've got achievers and then non-achievers that are just completely dependent and not getting anywhere or are in a hopeless existence. The best way to get them out of a hopeless existence is to give them a better education. So even within the public school world, we've got to figure out how to let kids choose which school they go to and go to a better school than what they're stuck in.
The problem is that we have, just a quick follow-up, the problem that we have is that over 100,000 children today in New York State. New York State is obviously not going to be a state at this time in history that's going to be supportive of vouchers. The federal government, if there are those in the federal government who are sensitive and appreciate the idea that schools can do better and students can do better, they really don't have any incentive whatsoever in a financial way to help those families get to that level. In a more Republican-oriented type of situation, such as Wisconsin, where vouchers have been extremely successful, you see that there's success in the school choice realm.
Yeah, and for example, while I don't really want the federal government involved, there is like Title I funds that are given to poor kids, they're given to poor schools. I have advocated that they be given to the poor parents and not to the school, and then the poor parents can choose which they go to, public, private, or otherwise. So I'm not against the federal government if they're already involved, trying to direct it and being more for school choice, but my druthers would be to not have them involved at all, and that means you just need better government in New York.
Thank you.
Group for the next question.
Good morning, Senator. Unlike my colleagues, the previous two people, I will try to be brief.
We'll see.
I happen to have been last year in the plaza as well when spent the Shabbat dinner there, and I really look up to you that you took that whole evening and spent that whole couple of hours with some of our friends, and that speaks volumes about your concerns and support for Israel. The fact that you made a trip out to Israel and spent all that time there to learn about the country and learn about the security and all the issues that they deal with in safety. Much has been said about the nuclear deal with Iran, and all the problems that and the dangers that will come out of this. Senator, should we as Americans and American Jews who support and have a strong support for Israel be very concerned about this agreement?
Yes, and I think what's most important, and I've talked to the administration about this, and I want to be very frank where I am for negotiations as opposed to war. If there's a way we can have a negotiated peace, I want peace as opposed to war. But you know, that's exactly what Netanyahu said when he came before a joint session of Congress recently. But there are some, I think, who frankly have a simplistic understanding of this, that think war is the only option. I still think there are other options. It doesn't mean that I favor a bad deal, though. And my main concern about the deal right now is not actually the details. My main concern is that the president writes 1,300 words and says the agreement means this, and then the Iranians come out with a 500-word, they tweet this in English, saying exactly the opposite, that the agreement means this, and the president says it means this. And I think that goes to the sincerity or the credibility of whether or not we can believe that they will keep their word in the agreement. So above and beyond the details, that's a big problem. And it's a problem for me who wants a negotiated peace. The second item that is a problem with this is that they say that the negotiations, as they go forward, they maintain that we're only talking about nuclear enrichment and not terrorism or ballistic missiles. And I thought that was a good point that Netanyahu made, is that when he came, is we really need to be talking about all of this. And I'll tell you the most worrisome statement was the president's spokesman last week saying, well, of course they'll probably still be involved in a little terrorism. And it's like, how are we to believe the agreement if they're really going to try to be part of the civilized world and not have a nuclear weapon, but they're still just going to dabble in a little bit of terrorism? So, well, I don't think we have to have a final agreement on ballistic missiles or a final agreement on everything. You would think that if they want us to believe that this is in good faith, they would be saying, the next thing we'll be working on is a ballistic agreement on conventional weapons, and we are not going to be promoting terrorism. And while they might not say they're going to recognize Israel, which I think we all want to happen, could they not at least say they're going to recognize the sovereignty of other nations in the region? I think all of those would be a big step forward. I've been part of the group that has been pushing with Corker, working behind the scenes with Corker, to make this bill that says that the agreement has to be voted on by Congress. For a couple of reasons. One, I think that's the law. We created the sanctions, and I did vote for all of the sanctions as well. That in creating the sanctions, they're a law created by Congress. They can't be undone by the president. And even the president acknowledges this, but we wrote a waiver into the law, which I think was a mistake, which gave him the ability to temporarily suspend. As long as he's president, he can suspend the sanctions. So we don't allow, if he signs an agreement, we can say we don't accept the agreement, but he still has a waiver